Welcome to the Soul Touched by Dogs podcast, the show for dog lovers who see dogs not as toys or tools, but wise souls worth our respect and care. I'm Anke Herman, and I'm your host. I talk to pawsome humans, people who do great work for dogs and their people. So come and join us for today's conversation. Hello and welcome, Elizabeth Ann. I'm very happy to have you here today.
I'm really happy to be here, Anke. Thank you so much.
And so we're both quite excited because the lovely Suzanne Clothier, we have to give her a little shout out. She connected us. And so I already know that I have a very amazing guest in the room today. So let's start out. Let people know, where in this lovely world are you based and what's your business with dogs?
Great. I am in Whidbey Island, Washington, and in the great Pacific Northwest, and have been here for a number of years and off and on all over the place in the US. And I started doing healing work, my gosh, really when I was a young child. My dad would just say, sweetie, I'd come along with, excuse me, a bird that fell out of a nest or a bird that flew into the window, and he'd say, just put it in your hands, hold it in your next to your heart, and send it love. And they always flew away. And then through my life, my young childhood, everyone started bringing me animals. You know how that goes, and I just do the same thing and, tweak around a little bit on their body, but really just basically doing energy work on them without really knowing I had a label, I didn't have a label at that time. It was not knowing what I was really doing. And so just sending them love. And so years later, I actually became a veterinary technician. And I was thinking about it before this podcast, and it was 45 years ago. It's a long time.
Time flies.
Yeah, I just aged myself. And I did, I learned a lot about mainstream medicinal approaches with animals. And so that kind of gave me a foundation to work from and to fill in some gaps and things. And then, of course, I quickly flew into the alternative medicine, which it was really called at that time. It's really now sort of complementary medicine, which is wonderful. And started doing all sorts of human modalities on the animals. So I was learning the human modality aspect of it and then applying it to the animals. And it was working, and there were all sorts of fun things. And in that process, I learned, I started studying Chinese medicine. And I studied 8-element medicine, which is sort of mainstream Chinese medicine. And then I fell in love. It was a little boring for me, the 8-element, to be honest. Interesting, but boring. And then I went into 5-element, and 5-element had this just amazing structure to it that made sense to me because it's very nature-centric. So it's basically based on nature, which most medicinal approaches were early on with all indigenous people. And so, but it made sense to me because I was a nature person and really understood a lot about nature and wanted to always know more. And so here was an application that I could really resonate with. And and it dovetailed really nicely with all the other modalities I was doing, like, Reiki and this and that. I mean, there were just so many, cranial sacral. And I always felt I needed a big toolbox to get what I wanted to done. Because I was working with some mainstream veterinarians that had a bigger scope and really cared about the animals enough to say, give it to this Elizabeth gal and see what she can do with it. Go see her and see what she can do, because they ran out of their options. And so it was a nice intro that I had the veterinary technician, the medical training, and then went into the alternative. So 5-element became one of my loves, and I started telling my clients after the first visit, I'd take a really big history, and I'd get a lot of information on the animal and behaviors and personalities and things like that. And I started sharing with my clients what element I thought their animal was, whether it was typically horse or dog, but sometimes cats. Cats are cats, so sometimes we can apply it, sometimes we can't. They're shapeshifters in their own right, and so, but many other, farm animals and things too. And that was just this powerful lens that ended up going out into the world, because what would happen is my clients would think about what the animal was, and maybe that was, primary and secondary I'd be talking about. And then they'd go home and they'd chew on it, and then they'd come back the next visit and they'd say, oh my God, I finally figured out my husband, and he's a wood element, and now I get it. I've been, in angst over why does he do what he does all the time, and that's the whole thing about five element. Why do they do what they do? And that's the personality piece that I plucked out to engage the client in it, and kind of so they could have an understanding of some piece in the five element, because it's a giant ancient structure, healing structure with a lot of moving targets in it. There's moving pieces everywhere. So basically what I did was pluck out the personality piece, hand it over to them and say, okay, because behavior and personality of the animal and stress responses are one of our primary indicators for five element work. So we look at the whole animal. We're not just looking at a body part or an organ or a meridian. We're really looking at who is that dog, or who is that horse or animal, and why do they do what they do? And so the why do they do what they do part was really important to me, because I started feeling like, oh, it gives people an understanding of the animal. They are starting to understand. And understanding, I think, makes the world go round. I really truly believe that, Anka. And it's precious, and it provides acceptance for us sometimes inside, at least a little vein of acceptance to understand why they do what they do. And these are archetypal personalities, based on the five elements. And so that was just a really powerful thing. And then through the years, all my clients said, when are you going to write the book? When are you going to write the book? When are you gonna write the book? So I finally semi-retired and decided to write the book. So I wrote Know Your Dog's True Nature. It's Understanding Canine Personality Through the Five Elements. And it's traditionally published through Inner Traditions, but it's available all over the world. And what I'd like to do next, if I could, is just breeze through the five elements and kind of give everyone a feel for what the animals are. And we'll, of course, do
I would
dog.
love that. I would love that. And I would also, I mean, I have so many more questions, but yes, please do kind of get, I'm just like, my mind is spinning. Like I'm enrolled in in a qigong class, and it's all about the five elements, right? So I'm really kind of curious to see where
Oh,
where the parallels are, and I kind of
yes.
hadn't, well, it does make sense to apply to personalities, like it makes, and yes, if we, I mean, it's the same with people. Like if somebody is an idiot and we kind of know where he's coming from, then it's almost like, yeah, it doesn't mean I need to agree, but it doesn't
Right.
upset me as much. It's
Right.
almost like I can let it go. I can kind of live with it or work with it. So I think, yes, that makes so much sense to me. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, one thing, if go through the five, and I would love to know what, I mean, I love how you said, well, oh yeah, the vets kind of trusted you because you're kind of like traditionally trained, so they kind of send people to you. But say if clients come to you, what are the kind of things that people come to you for, where you kind of apply that? So if you can try to kind of like pack that on the back of the five, or start out with it, whatever. But that's definitely something I'm curious about.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah. So, so because it's a nature-centric approach to healing, they start with seasons. And seasons are part of each element. So each element archetype. So think of them as archetypes. And so the first one is spring, because spring is sort of when our world starts opening up, right? Everything is full of potential, has new growth, burgeoning forth, really, just potentials in the air, and it's all coming up out of the ground, out of the trees, and that's the wood element. So we call that the wood element. And these dogs are incredible athletes. They're competitive. They're highly intelligent, and they love to be trained and have a job or do something like agility that's really a challenge for them. They really need challenges, and they're amazing dogs. And when you think about all the potential they have and how they live and breathe that potential, excuse me, um, and and the wood element is often pigeonholed into some working dogs, like police dogs, military
Yeah, I
dogs.
was just thinking Malleys and Border Collies.
Exactly. Yeah, border collie's a little different sometimes, but it crosses over. And just a quick note on that, the breeds, we don't type them by breeds with the elements, but we often see patterns of breeds in the elements. So German Shepherds are often wood, Malinois are wood, Rottweilers can be wood if they have enough oomph to them, and so the wood element is just this amazing being. They're brave. You think about military dogs going into bombing buildings and, watching all that death, and they're stout. And so when you think about a tree, trees are resilient, aren't they? They try to be, and their growth is potential is amazing. And so we look at that, and the real quick thing that we look for through all of this, and I'll mention these, is the stress response, because that's how we're going to tell what our dog is. So that's a little tidbit for everyone to think about. And the stress response for the wood element is in human world, 5 element, it's anger. But we know our dogs don't really have anger, but they have impatience, they have frustration, they have aggression due to overprotectiveness oftentimes, or just aggression, for whatever reason, because their needs aren't met. And in my book, I go through a lot of needs and wants and supports for all of these animals. So it's all in there, and it's actually all, everybody says it's such a fun, great read, comprehensive with all of that. So we don't have time today. So that's kind of the wood animal. So if you have a dog that gets impatient because you're overtraining them, or they need challenge, and they also need boundaries, because that's what keeps them really becoming good at what they do. And the last thing about the wood dog, for support, is movement is their medicine. These dogs can't lay around all day. They need to move because they're athletic and they have that competitive nature. So that's the wood element. Sorry, I'm getting blings. I don't know if you can hear it, but I apologize. Notifications. And so the next element is the summer season, and that's the fire dog. And the fire dog is a party animal diva. They are extremely social. They love to have fun. And everyone loves them. So one thing I want you to do through this process, as I explain them, is think about the element actually in nature. Not the animal, but the element in nature. So fire like warms us, right? We discovered we could cook food with it, thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's just this amazing thing that you're drawn to often. but it also has the ability to burn down houses and forests, right? So it has this emotional range. The fire element archetypes have an emotional range. Happy, 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 happy. Then it turns into what we call in Chinese medicine excess joy, which sounds like it should be a good thing, but it is not. And that starts to precipitate a disturbance of the Shen. And that disturbance of the Shen is like almost like a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And so when that happens, we have to ground ourselves as our, wonderful handlers we are, and take a deep breath and go into whatever is panicking this dog and just calm them down, because they're always up like a helium balloon like this, and they have what, okay, that's the one, yeah. They have what I call charismatic magnetism. And that's where people are drawn to these dogs. They'll walk across the street to come and pet your dog if you have a fire dog. And the fire dog is just loving every minute of it. And that's part of its support, is you have to be able to have that dog be social, not just with other dogs, and many of them can't do other dogs, but with humans, where they get adoration. They're adored by these humans, and they get all this love, and they just soak it all in, and then they just spread all this goodness around. And I always say with the fire dogs I've had, that people ask me 10 years after they've passed on into the other world, they'll say, "Oh, do you ever miss, Sage or Louis?" I miss them all the time. They have this huge fan club. So people remember these dogs, and they are memorable. They're just these bright spots, these bright lights in our world. So same with fire people. So next we move to the late summer, they call it, which is sort of like an Indian summer, sometimes they call it, or the end of summer before autumn comes. And that's the earth dog. And the earth element dog is a nurturer, a caregiver. They're very kid loving. They're like, kind of the big yellow labs that like to hang around with the kids and watch over them, and every other animal on your farm. They just love them, and they keep track of them, and they're not really protecting so much, like the wood element would do, or the metal, which we'll get to next. But they're actually just watching over everyone, and just making sure all the family's together. And they love that. And they're absolute foodies, so they gain weight by looking at food typically. So that's one of their detriments. And so we need to really support them in two ways. One is to make sure we give them good calorie food, not tons and tons of treats, because they're great at asking us for treats in the way that you almost have to give them, because they're so adorable and they're so loving and caring, and okay, you can have one, and that adds up. And in old age, that really adds up, because their metabolism slows down. There are organs associated with all these. That's in my book, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but theirs are digestive organs. So their metabolism will slow down. So enzymes are really good support for these dogs. Just routine-based lifestyle is very important for these dogs too, because they like routine. They're the ones that are, if they had a wristwatch, they'd be looking at their wrist 2 minutes before dinner and coming and getting you and saying, "Mom, it's time for dinner. It's time for breakfast." So that's the earth element, and they're just wonderful, lovable dogs. They kind of cross over with the ultimate friendliness with the fire dog, and they're steadfast, and they're wonderful animals. And the next one is the autumn dog, and that is a metal dog, a metal element. And so when you think, can I back up for a second on Earth? I'm going to back up because I wanted to make that relationship with nature. So when you think about the Earth, you think about how it fosters community. So, whether it's plants or people or animals or wildlife, there's community, in Earth. And so that's really important to start thinking that way of how solid and grounded it is and how much it's there for us. We are on Earth, and we are Earth, and so aren't these animals. So back to the metal dog. The metal dog is, so think about metal in nature, and metal is rigid, right? And it's not very flexible. So we have a lot of work to do to try to get that animal to learn to be somewhat flexible, but they're just really not. And we call them the librarians because they're highly, highly intelligent, probably even more so than the wood dog, which is probably at the close to the top. But the metals are, you think of librarians of old, and you think about they're kind of rigid, like don't put that book there, and they're highly intelligent. They're not super social. These animals, the metal elements, don't like being touched a lot. So they're the dog that you'll walk up with, if you have one, you'll walk up to someone and the person will kind of want to pet the dog or interact with the dog in some way. And the dog will just turn their head sideways and not look at the person. They're like, no, I don't care to interact with you, and that's partly because they are an extremely purpose-driven animal. If there's one word to describe a metal element, it's purpose. And they need a job. They absolutely need a job. Wood dogs can play and they can do agility and they can do all that. But metal elements do best with a job. And you see these dogs all over. A lot of them are border collies. If they don't have a job, they make a job. So they start, Australian Shepherds do that. Terriers, a lot of metal dogs are terriers. And, they have to have a job. They're very businesslike. And when they don't, they grieve and they get sad if they lose a bonded handler or they lose a job or they lose a bonded animal in the house. You will see them grieve. So they're very, very interesting, but they're really vital to our world. Very important because they are the best search and rescue dogs. We also talk in the book about sense organs for each element, and their sense organ is their nose. So we all know that dogs have incredible noses to do great work for out there in the world. But these dogs have a few more cells in there that make them the top notch. And I used to do search and rescue, and the metal dogs were the top dogs that you wanted to work with. They never tire. They just do their job, and they're so good at it. So something to think about for support for them is if you have a metal dog, and give them some kind of job, make a job around the house, or, figure that out. Sometimes just going to nose work classes is really helpful, scent work classes. And that will make them feel like they're working and they're using their body to work. And the last dog is the winter dog. And the winter dog is the water element. And these animals are incredibly special. We call them our four-legged spiritual teachers. That's one of the many names for them. They're the quintessential empaths. And we all know that our dogs are empathic and they feel our feelings. Often dark dogs too, sometimes black or black and brown. Yep. And they feel our feelings, but these dogs feel our feelings well before we ever feel our feelings. So they're just highly, highly sensitive. When you think of water in nature, it can shapeshift all over the place. So it can be snow, it can be ice, it can be mist, it can be rain, it can be the ocean, it can be a tsunami, it can be a calm pond or pool. Running river flowing, so there's water shapeshifts itself all the time. And these animals do that too. So one of the ways we know that you have a water element is by noticing that they're pretending to be all the other elements. So they like wear a mask sometimes, and it'll drive you crazy trying to figure the element out. And there are quizzes in the book, so those really help discern. Once people read everything, then they start picking out the elements. And then once they do the quizzes, it really solidifies what's in there. And so when these water elements shapeshift, especially young water elements, I have one now, she's just going to turn 3, and she's finally figured out who she is. But they will become a wood element one day, act really woody, maybe even for a week, and then next thing you know, they're acting like an earth element, and then the next thing you know, they're a metal element, and then sometimes they're just this fire dog, and they're just amazing like that. So they really transform a lot. They're also very, very sensitive to energetic disturbances. So any kind of power lines or pesticides, herbicides, all of that will create problems with, these are like the canaries in the coal mine for us. And their goal in their life is to make us learn more about ourselves and about the world around us. That really truly is. We all agree on that. The goal of the animal is to make us a better human in a lot of ways. And and so they will come up with things that the veterinarians can't figure out, and people go to 5 or 6 vets, and it's not till you really get on Google or wherever chats and start connecting with others to find out these symptoms that you learn it, and by the time you figure it out, it's all gone. So, but it often can be those energetic disturbances. So remember that they're highly sensitive beings. So they're going to be more sensitive to those aspects. And they're just really special animals. I can't say enough about them. Their one issue is their stress response is fear. And it's not simple fear, it's visceral fear. It's the kind of fear that brings in the sympathetic dominant, behavior of, I can't hear you, I can't hear you, I can't hear you, I just have to run. And so they can, horses can tear down barns. Their sense organ is hearing. So loud noises, fireworks, gunshots, backfires of cars, things that are sudden, a big loud noise will almost always hit almost every water animal. And some of them have enough of a secondary element of maybe a wood that's, fearless with all those sounds, or an earth that's easygoing, where they won't react as big. But a lot of the really pure water elements they just react. So
That's
so that,
fascinating. You
yeah.
see, I kind of like, they've got my 2 boys. They've like this one crossed the bridge in April, this one 3 years ago, and the 2 girls I have now. I feel like I'm here. I was like, yep, that's her. This is him. Like he were full on water. Like, so how do you? Because that was one of my questions. Like, how do you know? But from your description, it's like, well, this is Mother Earth. Well, clearly, so here is Mrs. Fire. It's like
Yeah.
it's so easy. Like just listening to you is like, is that, am I likely to be correct with that first gut feel reaction? Or will
Yeah.
I find that I probably, if I do the quiz, it will come out differently? Or like, how do you look at a dog and come to the conclusion which is the dominant element?
I just get a sense, because I've been doing this for 35 years, I guess I've known the 5 element theory. So I've seen so many animals, and hearing the behaviors of the animals, especially under stress, are really where we look. It's the best way besides the quizzes. The quizzes sort of validate what you're sensing. So we all know our animals, and we're so enmeshed with them, hopefully, and we want to know who they are, and we want to know why they do what they do. And so a lot of it is, just observation. And what the book does is it takes all those like sort of missing links that we have, and it just puts it all into a framework, and actually many different frameworks in the book, because we wanted everyone to be able to learn every way and to have support. And there's some acupressure points in there. There's a old dog section for each element. There's a rescue dog section for each element. We even have scenarios, and lots of stories that really depict who the animals are, at any given moment. And so the one thing we need to always remember is that we all have 5 elements, all of us, including us humans. And it's just a game of percentages. Like, what one did you come into the world with? The water elements, when they come in, they're dealing with some karmic issue around fear. There's usually something that's really happened bad at birth, pre-birth, or just post-birth that created a fear deep in there, and they've got to learn to work through it, and they need a really solid handler to do that. So when we know that, those are the most rehomed dogs, by the way, those and the wood elements, because they're misunderstood so much, and they're not, they're in the respect of their responses to stress, they're not easy keepers. So people send them back into the system all the time. And
I'm
that's
not
really sad.
surprised. Yeah,
Yeah.
because like here, he was exactly that, like very fearful, the noise thing, and
Mm.
like I've been told a million times, like most people would not have handled that dog,
Yes.
because he was so like highly strung. And as you were saying, like, the the biggest teacher, that was him. Because if you have
Yeah.
an easy to handle dog, then you think, oh yeah, I know about dogs, I know how to give treats, and that's it, right? So
Right.
he would not respond to any of that. Like,
Right.
all
Right.
the
They
normal
don't.
stuff just would not
Mm-mm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
He'd pull on the leash like a maniac. And I remember the moment I read somewhere where somebody said, look, your only job is to help this dog relax. And the moment I could see that everything he did was an expression of hypersensitivity, it's like the way I looked at him was different. All of a sudden, everything made sense,
Yeah.
and the moment
Yeah.
I could offer him a calmer environment, he turned into a different dog, you
Right.
know?
Acceptance,
So,
right? There's some
yeah,
acceptance for who he
yeah,
is, who that dog
yeah.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Beautiful.
made such a difference because, well, we moved into a quiet area and all of a sudden there he was, belly up, which had never happened before,
Yeah.
because he was always like on edge like that, and it was
Right.
such I mean, I mean, actually looking at what you're sharing through the lens of, oh, what are my dogs, and how much knowing that and knowing their reactions and their go-to when they're under stress, like that's because that's the piece, like
The peace.
knowing to basically put them into their category, that's one thing, right? But I think what's so obvious here is how that knowing can really help us support them in the best way,
Right.
and that seems to be what I've heard, very different for the different types, what they need in order to come back to balance. It's very different for each of them.
Yeah, yeah, and that's all in the book, in like I said, in sort of many different ways. So, everyone learns differently, and everyone reads things and picks out different parts. And so, my goal was really to bring this out into the world for the dogs, but in the second half of the book, it's all about humans. So we have human archetypes in there, and we have great stories on that. And then the last part is the relationship. So it's a weaving in and out of elements. Like, how does this element work with that element? And what do
Mm.
you do? There's no bad relationships. There's none. It's usually a learning process, and
Yeah.
that's through every single dog you will learn something if you can see them for who they are, accept who they are, and work with it. So, and I think I love the dog training world. There's some fabulous people out there like Suzanne, just understanding. And Suzanne is an archetype person too. So we really gel with this because we
You
both
can geek
see
out on.
yeah, we both see the archetypes and we just sort of calling them different things in a way, but I really believe that it can make a huge difference in the world. And I feel like I've teamed up with the dogs on this book to make the world a better place, where
I
we're
love
not
that.
all so much judgment and everything out there. And what if we could just understand a little more and, find at least within ourselves acceptance for that person. You don't have to accept their behaviors and things, but you can at least within your own heart, you can accept who they are and be okay with that instead of, we get torn up sometimes because we go through difficult situations with the dogs, and the dogs are our training wheels for ourselves to learn ourselves and then to learn about others. So yeah,
I
they're
could not agree more. That's so powerful. So well, obviously the question is, where can people go find the book? And we're gonna just already tease people. I'd love to come have you back for for like one of the live masterclasses where we can just have more time and unpack a little bit more, and and people can ask questions and really sort of dig in a little bit more and how to know what the archetypes of like your dogs are, and and I'm like, is that staying the same or does that change over time? I've got loads of questions still. But and also then, what are the different ways to support the different kinds of dogs, and how does, also which person archetype goes how with which dog. And so there's a whole world to explore, which just if you're listening, I'm gonna invite her back to kind of dig in a whole lot deeper into all of this. So for today, where can people find out about you? Where can they get hold of the book?
Yes, so my book just launched last Tuesday, September 10th. So that was amazing to have it come out. So it's everywhere around the world except Germany because we haven't translated. And then but if you go on any Amazon, so EU, AU, NZ, I think, and of
ES,
course
please.
the US. And what's your
ES,
Yes, okay, I'll
Spain.
tell my publishers. I'll definitely tell the publisher. And so you can get it anywhere there, or Barnes and Noble, Simon and Schuster, Inner Traditions, BAM, which is Books A Million, bookshop.org, and I think a whole bunch of other smaller ones that are carrying it. So one thing we can do is if anyone has a brick and mortar bookstore near them, which I love brick and mortars, I'm getting gray hair, so I'm of that ilk of that. And that was only 30 years ago. I just realized the other day, 30 years ago, we were buying books, which seems like a long time to some folks, but it feels like a snap moment in time to me. But so your brick and mortars will, if you ask them to order it, they can
Okay.
order it through Inner Traditions because they do, they send books all over the world. So yeah, and there's a
Awesome.
Kindle on Amazon for Kindle people. So
Awesome,
yeah.
awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously put all the links in the show notes and underneath and below this video, wherever you're watching this. So it's not going to be hard to find. Thank you so much. This was, it's almost like, what it feels like? We've just had an appetizer. Now I'm really hungry.
That's great.
So
Good.
thank you so much for coming, and I can't wait to have you back.
Okay, Anka, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so other dog lovers can find the show. If you haven't already, head over to soultouchedbydogs.com and sign up for weekly doggy cuteness, tips, recommendations, and personal stories to warm your dog-loving heart. And if you know a awesome human you think I should interview, I'd love an introduction. Email me at Anke, that's ANKE, @soultouchedbydogs.com.